In the picturesque coastal town of Seashell Cove, Oregon, where the Pacific waves crashed against rugged cliffs and quaint Victorian houses dotted the shoreline, a tragedy was about to unfold that would shatter the community's tranquil facade. The year was 2020, and as summer approached, the town of 12,000 residents buzzed with anticipation for the annual Seashell Festival, blissfully unaware of the dark secrets brewing beneath the surface of one of its most prominent families. At the heart of this tale were the Harrisons. David, a successful real estate developer at 45, his wife Elena, 42, a beloved high school art teacher, and their teenage daughter Zoe. The Harrisons lived in a sprawling beach house on Ocean View Drive, its large windows offering breathtaking views of the coastline. Their life seemed picture perfect, a testament to the American dream realized in this idyllic seaside setting. David Harrison was a tall, charismatic man with salt and pepper hair and piercing green eyes. He had a reputation for being a shrewd businessman, but was also known for his generosity, often sponsoring local events and youth programs. Elena, with her warm smile and artistic flair, was a favorite among students and fellow teachers alike. Her vibrant paintings of seascapes adorned many homes and businesses in Seashell Cove. Completing the Harrison family circle was Megan Foster, Elena's best friend since college. Megan, a 41-year-old divorcee, had moved to Seashell Cove 5 years ago at Elena's urging, seeking a fresh start after a bitter divorce. With her fiery red hair and quick wit, Megan had quickly become a part of the town's social fabric, working as a freelance writer and part-time yoga instructor at the local community center. On the surface, the friendship between Elena and Megan seemed unshakable. They were often seen together at local cafes, laughing over coffee, or walking along the beach deep in conversation. Megan was a constant presence at the Harrison home, joining them for family dinners and holiday celebrations. She was like an aunt to Zoe, offering advice on everything from boys to college applications. But beneath this veneer of close friendship and family harmony, tensions were brewing. David had been spending more and more time at the office, claiming the pressure of a big development project was keeping him busy. Elena found herself increasingly lonely, throwing herself into her art as a distraction from her growing sense of disconnection from her husband. Megan, ever the supportive friend, spent more time with Elena, offering a sympathetic ear and words of encouragement. "He's just busy with work, Elena," she would say, her hand resting comfortingly on her friend's arm. "Things will settle down soon." What Elena didn't know was that Megan's comforting words masked a bitter irony. For the past 6 months, Megan and David had been engaged in a passion affair, their secret trysts hidden behind the guise of business meetings and yoga classes. It had started innocently enough. David, feeling neglected as Elena immersed herself in her art, had found himself confiding in Megan during one of her frequent visits to their home. Megan, still nursing the wounds of her failed marriage, found in David the attention and validation she craved. Their first kiss had been a moment of weakness at a charity gala, fueled by champagne and mutual loneliness. Both had immediately felt guilty, vowing it would never happen again. But the attraction proved too strong to resist, and soon they were meeting in secret, stealing moments of passion whenever they could. As spring turned to summer, their affair intensified. They became bolder, taking risks that in hindsight seemed foolish. A lingering touch at a dinner party, a meaningful glance across a crowded room at the local art gallery opening. The thrill of their secret relationship was intoxicating, clouding their judgment and making them careless. Elena, absorbed in preparations for upcoming art exhibition at the Seashell Cove Gallery, remained oblivious to the betrayal happening right under her nose. She was grateful for Megan's increased presence in their lives, appreciating the support of her friend as she struggled with feelings of distance from David. Zoe, however, with the keen perception of a teenager, began to sense that something was off. She noticed the way her father's eyes would follow Megan across a room, the slight tensing of her mother's shoulders when David and Megan were engaged in what seemed like an overly intimate conversation. But she dismissed these observations, unable or unwilling to consider the implications. As the Seashell Festival approached, bringing with it an influx of tourists of activity in the town, The pressure on David and Megan's secret relationship intensified. They found it increasingly difficult to find time alone together, their frustration growing with each near miss and interrupted moment. It was during this time that Elena began to notice small changes in David's behavior. He was more attentive suddenly, bringing her flowers for no reason and suggesting spontaneous date nights. While part of her was pleased by this renewed attention, another part felt suspicious. Why the sudden change? One evening, as Elena was sorting through a box of old photographs for a project, she came across a picture that made her heart stop. It was from last year's Seashell Festival, a group shot of her family with Megan. But what caught Elena's eye was the way David and Megan were looking at each other, a hint of something more than friendship in their expressions. Doubt, once planted, grew rapidly. Elena began to pay closer attention to the interactions between her husband and her best friend. She noticed the subtle touches, the inside jokes, the way they always seemed to end up next to each other at social gatherings. As her suspicions grew, Elena found herself unable to concentrate on her artwork. Her usual vibrant seascapes took on darker tones, stormy skies and turbulent waters reflecting her inner turmoil. She withdrew from friends and colleagues, making excuses to avoid social engagements. Megan, noticing Elena's change in mood, tried to reach out. "Is everything okay, Elena? You seem distant lately," she asked one afternoon as they sat on the deck of the Harrison home, the sound of crashing waves in the background. Elena studied her friend's face, searching for any sign of guilt or deception. "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a smile, "just stressed about the upcoming exhibition." Megan reached out and squeezed Elena's hand, the gesture both comforting and, to Elena's newly suspicious mind, somehow false. "You know I'm always here for you, right? Whatever you need." The irony of Megan's words was not lost on Elena. She pulled her hand away, making an excuse about needing to check on dinner. As she walked into the house, she could feel Megan's confused gaze on her back. That night, as David slept beside her, Elena lay awake, her mind racing. She thought about confronting them, demanding the truth. But another part of her, the part that still clung to the illusion of her perfect life, resisted. What if she was wrong? What if her suspicions were just paranoia, a product of her own insecurities? As the days passed, Elena's inner turmoil grew. She became withdrawn and irritable, snapping at David over small things and making excuses to avoid spending time with Megan. Her art, usually a source of solace, now felt hollow. The canvases in her studio stood unfinished, a visual representation of her fractured state of mind. David and Megan, caught up in their own guilty pleasure, failed to notice the change in Elena's demeanor. They continued their affair, growing bolder in their secret meetings. They began to talk about a future together, fantasizing about a life where they could be open about their relationship. As the Seashell Festival drew nearer, the tension in Seashell Cove reached a fever pitch. The town was abuzz with preparations, streets being decorated with strings of seashells and colorful banners. Amidst this festive atmosphere, Elena's world was crumbling. One afternoon, while David was supposedly at a business meeting, Elena decided to surprise him at his office. As she approached the building, she saw David's car in the parking lot, parked next to Megan's distinctive red convertible. Her heart pounding, Elena entered the building and made her way to David's office. The sight that greeted her as she opened the door would be forever seared into her memory. David and Megan, locked in a passionate embrace, oblivious to her presence. For a moment, Elena stood frozen, unable to process the scene before her. It was Megan who noticed her first, her eyes widening in shock as she pushed David away. "Elena," she gasped, her face pale with fear and guilt. David spun around, his expression a mix of surprise and horror. "Elena, I can explain," he began, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Elena didn't wait to hear their explanations. She turned and fled, tears blurring her vision as she ran from the building. She drove home in a daze, her mind replaying the scene in David's office over and over. As she sat in her studio later that evening, surrounded by her unfinished paintings, Elena felt a strange calm descend over her. The initial shock and pain had given way to a cold, calculating anger. She began to formulate a plan, one that would make David and Megan pay for their betrayal. The next few days passed in a blur. Elena pretended everything was normal, playing the role of the oblivious wife and friend to perfection. She threw herself into preparations for the Seashell Festival, volunteering to help with the art exhibition, and even suggesting a family dinner with Megan the night before the festival. David and Megan, relieved that Elena seemed unaware of their indiscretion, eagerly agreed to the dinner. They saw it as an opportunity to maintain the facade of normalcy, unaware that Elena was setting the stage for her revenge. On the night of the dinner, Elena prepared David's favorite meal, roasted salmon with a special herb sauce. As she cooked, she hummed softly to herself, a tune that seemed oddly discordant in the tense atmosphere of the house. Megan arrived first, a bottle of wine in hand and guilt written across her face. Elena greeted her with a warm hug, noting with grim satisfaction how her friend stiffened at the contact. Come in, Elena said brightly. David should be home any minute." As they waited for David, Elena poured glasses of wine for herself and Megan. With her back turned, she slipped a small vial from her pocket and added its contents to 2 of the glasses. Her hands shook slightly, but her resolve remained firm. David arrived home, greeting Elena with a kiss on the cheek and Megan with a nod that seemed a little too casual. They sat down to dinner, the conversation stilted and awkward despite Elena's attempts at cheerfulness. As the meal progressed, Elena watched David and Megan sip their wine, waiting for the effects to take hold. Halfway through the main course, David began to look pale, his forehead beading with sweat. Megan, too, seemed unwell, her words becoming slurred. "Are you feeling all right?" Elena asked, feigning concern. "You both look a bit peaky." David tried to stand but stumbled, his legs giving way beneath him. Megan slumped in her chair, her eyes struggling to focus. What's happening?" David managed to gasp before collapsing to the floor. Elena stood calmly, looking down at her husband and best friend as they lay unconscious on the dining room floor. "You shouldn't have betrayed me," she said softly, her voice devoid of emotion. What happened next would be the subject of much speculation and horror in the months to come. Elena, with a strength born of rage and betrayal, managed to drag both David and Megan's unconscious bodies to her art studio. There, surrounded by her paintings of serene seascapes, she committed an act of violence that would shock the quiet town of Seashell Cove to its core. Using her artistic tools in a grotesque parody of her usual creativity, Elena exacted her revenge. The details of what transpired in that studio would later make even hardened detectives blanch. When she was done, Elena calmly cleaned herself up, changed her clothes, and drove to the police station. Officer Jake Simmons was on duty that night, looking forward to the end of his shift and the start of the Seashell Festival the next day. The sight of Elena Harrison walking into the station, her clothes spattered with what looked like paint but smelled coppery, stopped him cold. "I'd like to report a crime," Elena said calmly, her eyes eerily vacant. "I've killed my husband and my best friend." At first, Officer Simmons thought it must be some kind of bizarre joke, but the dead seriousness in Elena's eyes quickly convinced him otherwise. He called for backup, and with a growing sense of dread, headed to the Harrison home. The scene that greeted the police at the Harrison residence was like something out of a nightmare. In Elena's studio, they found the bodies of David Harrison and Megan Foster, arranged in a macabre tableau that mimicked one of Elena's seascape paintings. The walls were splattered with blood, and various art tools had been used in unimaginable ways. As word of the murders spread through Seashell Cove, the town was plunged into shock and disbelief. The Seashell Festival, meant to begin the next day, was postponed indefinitely. Yellow crime scene tape surrounded the Harrison home, a stark contrast to the cheerful festival decorations that lined the streets. Detective Sarah Chen, a seasoned investigator from the state police, was called in to lead the investigation. As she surveyed the grisly scene in the studio, she knew this case would be unlike any she had handled before. "It's like she turned them into one of her paintings," one of the crime scene technicians muttered, his face pale as he paraphed the bodies. Detective Chen nodded grimly. "Art imitating life, or in this case, death," she replied. "Let's make sure we document everything meticulously. This is going to be a complex case." As the investigation unfolded, The dark secrets of the Harrison family and their relationship with Megan Foster began to come to light. Interviews with neighbors and friends painted a picture of a seemingly perfect family hiding deep-seated issues. Zoe Harrison, devastated by the loss of her parents and the arrest of her mother, provided crucial information. "I knew something was wrong," she told Detective Chen through tears. Dad and Aunt Megan, they were always whispering together, stopping conversations when I walked into a room. I should have said something. Forensic evidence from the crime scene corroborated Elena's confession. Her fingerprints were found on the murder weapons, and trace evidence linked her to both victims. Toxicology reports showed that David and Megan had been drugged, likely with a sedative mixed into their wine. As Detective Chen dug deeper, she uncalled Seashell records that suggested David had been planning to leave Elena. There were searches on his computer for divorce lawyers and hidden bank accounts with substantial sums of money. Megan's computer yielded further evidence of the affair, including intimate emails between her and David discussing their future together. There were also draft letters to Elena never sent, where Megan struggled with her guilt over betraying her best friend. The case against Elena was strong, but Detective Chen was troubled by the level of premeditation involved. This wasn't a crime of passion committed in the heat of the moment. Elena had planned her revenge carefully, using her intimate knowledge of her victims to craft a punishment she deemed fitting for their betrayal. As the investigation progressed, Seashell Cove found itself under an unwelcome spotlight. National media descended on the town, their vans lining the picturesque streets as reporters sought interviews with anyone connected to the case. The peaceful coastal community, once known for its beautiful beaches and quaint charm, was now synonymous with a gruesome double murder. The trial of Elena Harrison began 6 months after the murders, in the depths of a stormy Oregon winter. The small courthouse in Seashell Cove was ill-equipped to handle the media circus that accompanied the proceedings. Journalists and curious onlookers packed the courtroom each day, eager for every sordid detail of the case. Prosecutor James Watkins presented a straightforward case of premeditated murder. He painted Elena as a cold, calculating killer who had methodically planned and executed her revenge. This was not a crime of passion, he told the jury in his opening statement. This was a deliberate, brutal act of vengeance carried out with chilling precision. Elena's defense team, led by the experienced criminal attorney Laura Delaney, pursued a strategy of diminished capacity. They argued that the shock of discovering her husband's affair with her best friend had driven Elena to temporary insanity. "My client's actions, while tragic, were the result of extreme emotional distress," Delaney argued. "She was not in her right mind when she committed these acts." The trial lasted for 3 weeks, each day bringing new revelations and shocking testimony. Forensic experts detailed the brutal nature of the killings, their clinical descriptions causing several jurors to blanch. Crime scene photos were displayed, showing the grotesque tableau Elena had created with her victims' bodies. Perhaps the most heart-wrenching testimony came from Zoe Harrison. Now living with her grandparents, the teenager took the stand to speak about her family. "They were always so happy," she said, her voice breaking. "I never imagined anything like this could happen." Elena herself took the stand, her once vibrant appearance now dulled by months in custody. She spoke in a flat, emotionless tone as she recounted the events leading up to the murders. Her description of discovering David and Megan's affair was delivered with an eerie calmness that unnerved many in the courtroom. "When I saw them together in David's office, it was like something inside me broke," Elena testified. "Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my friendships, it was all a lie. In that moment, I knew they had to pay for what they'd done." As Elena described the night of the murders, a hush fell over the courtroom. She detailed how she had planned the dinner, drugged the wine, and carried out her gruesome revenge, her voice never wavering. Many observers were struck by the disconnect between the horrific acts she described and her calm demeanor. "I wanted them to become part of my art," Elena said, her eyes taking on a distant look. "They had turned my life into a twisted masterpiece of betrayal, so I decided to make them into my final creation." The prosecution's cross-examination was brutal, attempting to break through Elena's composure and reveal the calculated killer they believed her to be. But Elena remained impassive, answering questions with the same detached manner, neither showing remorse nor attempting to justify her actions. As the trial neared its conclusion, Seashell Cove remained divided. Some residents, particularly those who had known Elena for years, found it hard to reconcile the gentle artist and teacher they had known with a woman capable of such violence. Others, shocked by the brutality of the crimes, called for the harshest possible punishment. In his closing argument, Prosecutor Watkins emphasized the premeditated nature of Elena's actions. This was not a momentary lapse of judgment, he told the jury. Elena Harrison had days to reconsider her actions, to seek help, to confront her husband and friend. Instead, she chose to plan and execute a brutal double murder. She must be held accountable for these heinous acts. Defense attorney Delaney, in her final plea to the jury, returned to the theme of emotional distress. "We're not asking you to condone what Elena did," she said. "We're asking you to understand the mental state of a woman whose entire world had been shattered. The Elena Harrison who committed these acts was not the same woman who had been a beloved teacher and artist in this community for years. She was a woman pushed beyond the limits of her sanity by an unthinkable betrayal." After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. As the foreman stood to deliver the decision, a tense silence fell over the courtroom. "On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of David Harrison, we find the defendant, Elena Harrison, he announced. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Megan Foster, we find the defendant guilty." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by muffled sobs from Elena's family members. Elena herself showed no reaction, her face as impassive as it had been throughout the trial. Judge Marilyn Patel, a stern woman with graying hair and piercing blue eyes, took a moment to gather her thoughts before delivering the sentence. She looked directly at Elena, her gaze unflinching. "Elena Harrison, the crimes you have committed are among the most shocking and disturbing this court has ever seen," Judge Patel began. "While the court acknowledges the emotional distress you were under, the premeditated and brutal nature of these murders cannot be overlooked. The lives you took were not yours to take, regardless of the pain they caused you." The judge paused, her eyes sweeping across the packed courtroom before continuing. "Taking into account the severity of your crimes and the danger you pose to society, I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole for each count of murder, to be served consecutively." As the sentence was pronounced, a mix of reactions rippled through the courtroom. Some felt justice had been served, while others thought the punishment too harsh given the circumstances. Elena, her face pale but composed, was led away by court officers, leaving behind a community forever changed by her actions. In the days and weeks that followed, Seashell Cove struggled to come to terms with the tragedy that had unfolded in their midst. The Harrison home, once a symbol of success and happiness, stood empty, a silent reminder of the dark events that had transpired within its walls.